On May 17, 2024, a Reddit user posted on the Skinwalkers subreddit. r/Skinwalkers is a subreddit where users post real-life encounters with creatures known as Skinwalkers. Skinwalkers are harmful witches of Navajo origin who can turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as any kind of animal. These Skinwalkers usually use their powers for evil, and because of the delicate nature of the subject, Navajo natives rarely discuss Skinwalkers with outsiders, or even amongst themselves. However, the OP, or original poster, known as Don Hell, posted about his encounter with one. He starts by explaining how he wasn't one to believe in ghosts, ghouls, or anything paranormal until this very incident. What you're about to hear happened 3 years ago on a cold Sunday night in October. The OP was having troubles with his marriage, and his wife had left him and their 2 kids to spend some time with her mother in a nearby city. Due to the issues surrounding their marriage, the OP confessed that he was feeling lonely and depressed about his issues with his wife, so he set out to make it up to her by doing some much-needed work around the house. That Sunday night, the OP was doing some house chores while preparing for work for the week. He stayed right across from a big high school, but the other end of his house was more or less a dead end, with only 4 houses separating his house from the end of the road. It was midnight when he finished preparing for work, but he decided to push the limits and do one final chore before calling it a day. He was going to unpack some boxes stacked up close to the front door of the house. However, as he stepped outside, he heard something ominous, a baby crying. Now, the OP explains that both his kids were 6 and 9 years old at the time, so he wasn't expecting any baby noises from either of them, least of all at midnight. But he went to check their rooms, and they were both sleeping soundly. The crying continued, and it now sounded like it was coming from outside, so he returned to the front door and took a peek outside. He saw a misshapen figure walking alone at midnight, and although the baby sounds had stopped, he stepped outside to make sense of the figure walking down the road. There was a storm growing, and as he stepped out to make sense of what he was looking at, the storm slammed the door shut behind him. The sound of the door drew the creature's attention. It turned and looked right at him. He still couldn't make sense of what this creature was, but he was spooked, so he ran back inside. He closed all the windows, curtains, and doors of his house and grabbed a machete just in case. He stood behind the closed front door, and immediately he heard footsteps coming up to that same door. Only they weren't footsteps. They sounded more like hooves, or the sound that high heels would make. He wouldn't wait for whatever it was to find a way into the house. He was going to get to it first. He waited 5 minutes before flinging the door open and charging outside, machete in hand. But there was no sign of the creature. The boxes the OP had been working on were scattered and spread all over his front porch. But that was it. No sign of the creature. Was it a skinwalker? While the OP's story was rather vivid, one user, Gilgamesh vs. Humbaba, was quick to ask what part of the world the OP lived in, as many creatures use the sound of a baby crying to lure their victims. The OP replied that he lived in North Carolina at the time of the incident, and users were quick to point out that he hadn't encountered a skinwalker, but may have been met with some other creature, like a pukwudgie or a yunwi-sunzdi. Another user implied that the OP may have just heard a rabbit in distress or a coyote, as both animals make baby-like noises, and the boxes may have been knocked down by the wind or a curious raccoon. Another user by the name Josette22 asked if the OP lived near a cemetery, to which he replied that there was a large one 2 miles away from his house. Josette22 then informed him that he had met with a crawler, not a skinwalker, and warned him about being outside that late at night. But the OP replied that he has since moved away from the area, and he has never had any other experience like this since. In 2020, a user named Sweet_Tangerine shared a harrowing story on the subreddit r/Let'sNotMeet, a popular forum where individuals recount their true and terrifying experiences. Her tale of a dangerous encounter as a teenager struck a chord with many readers. A few years ago, Sweet_Tangerine was living with her abusive and significantly older boyfriend in Sacramento, California. One night, they returned from a party where her boyfriend became jealous and upset over something that happened. Upon arriving home, they had a heated argument. Her boyfriend, in a fit of rage, threw her out of his house around 1:30 or 2 a.m. She knocked and begged for him to let her back in, but he had locked all the entrances and turned off all the lights. It was clear he wasn't going to let her back in, at least not that night. Standing outside in her skimpy party clothes, she began to freeze as the temperature dropped to around 15 degrees. Without her wallet, purse, phone, or any other valuables, she was at a loss about what to do next. She thought about knocking on the neighbors' doors, but was anxious about waking them up and even more worried about getting her boyfriend in serious trouble. She was only 15 at the time and felt utterly helpless. She cried on his front porch, hoping to gain his sympathy, but he remained unmoved. Seeing no other option, she decided to walk to the nearest gas station to use the payphone, to call a friend and ask if she could sleep over. Dusting herself off, she began the long, cold trek to the gas station. She had walked a significant distance when she noticed a large white pickup truck cruising on the other side of the road. At first, she avoided making eye contact, feeling vulnerable in her party attire on a deserted road. Her heart stopped when she heard the truck stop, make a U-turn, and drive in her direction. She froze, but forced herself to walk faster. The truck pulled up beside her, and the driver rolled down his window, asking why she was out so late. She explained that she was heading to the gas station to meet a friend who was expecting her. The driver smiled and offered her a ride, but she refused politely. He insisted, but she reiterated that she didn't hitchhike. He responded, "Well, good. I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker, though. You just look like you need some help." She continued walking, and he continued driving alongside her. He then pulled out a police badge and explained that he had just gotten off duty, which was why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. It made sense, and given the freezing temperature, she felt safer accepting a ride from a cop. He assured her that he was just going to drop her at the gas station and make sure she got there safely. Reluctantly, she agreed and got into the truck. It wasn't far from the gas station, and she was glad to be out of the cold. Once inside, she noticed the truck didn't quite match the driver's professional demeanor. The truck was messy, with an ashtray full of cigarettes, newspapers scattered on the passenger floor, and a pair of handcuffs, coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, and a brightly colored bandana among the clutter. He apologized for the mess, saying it was his hunting truck, but she didn't mind as it was warm. They began talking, and he asked why she was scantily dressed. She narrated her ordeal, from the party to her boyfriend throwing her out. He listened closely, and she described him as charming and attentive. He told her about his family, mentioning he was a young dad with a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog, painting a picture of the perfect little family. After a while, she asked to use his phone to call her friend, but he refused, claiming he was saving the battery. This raised a red flag for her. Her fears were confirmed when they passed the gas station without stopping. In shock, she politely pointed out the gas station, but he ignored her and continued driving. Her heart pounded as she watched the gas station fade into the distance. She felt sick to her stomach, and her eyes began to tear up. She tried to ask him to turn back, but he remained silent, his expression empty and emotionless. She considered jumping out of the moving truck, but was worried about the snow and the risk of injury. She felt trapped and helpless, with only the dark, empty road and John for company. Desperate, she began crying and asked for his phone again, but he refused and told her to stop talking. He started muttering under his breath, saying things like, "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me, dressed like this." She was too tired, scared, and helpless to respond. She thought of various escape plans, including hiding the handcuffs she had seen earlier under her seat and praying they would encounter a cop so she could grab the steering wheel and swerve. She also considered crashing the truck into a streetlight. Just as she was planning her escape, John drove off the road and stopped the truck. He told her to get out because there was something wrong with the truck. Holding onto the center console, she begged and cried, saying she didn't want to get out because it was too cold. He screamed at her to get out, but she refused. Trying to humanize herself, she used his first name and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." He stared at her intently, then got back into the truck. She felt a brief moment of relief. John sat silently, staring at the steering wheel before lighting a cigarette. He warned her not to run, saying he could easily get her wherever he wanted. She wondered if he had a hunting rifle in the back, but didn't want to find out. Regaining some strength, she told John that her friend was still waiting for her, and would be worried that she hadn't made it to the gas station. She also asked about his wife and kids, to which he sharply replied that he didn't have any. This made her doubt everything he had told her. She asked what he was thinking, and he coldly replied, "I'm thinking of what to do with you." His response terrified her, and she began crying again, saying, "I just want to go home." John said nothing but started the truck again. They approached another gas station, and she prepared to grab the wheel. Just as she was about to act, John slowed down and pulled up to the gas station. He warned her not to tell anyone what had happened, threatening that he would find her. He claimed he did it to teach her a lesson about hitchhiking and urged her to get out before he changed his mind. She jumped out of the truck and ran towards the gas station. John drove off, and she only managed to catch a blur of the last 3 numbers on his license plate. She ran inside the gas station and asked the clerk to call the police. When the police arrived, she was relieved it wasn't John. She gave the officer all the details she could about her encounter. She asked him to check the cameras, but he went alone and later claimed he didn't see anything. When she asked if she could check, he refused sharply, questioning if she trusted him. She replied that she did, and he gave her a ride to her friend's house, lecturing her about Ted Bundy and the dangers of hitchhiking. She would later discover that her report was never filed, and her case number didn't exist. She never heard about John or his white truck again. In the comments, many users affirmed that John was indeed a cop, and some other users even went as far as highlighting eerily similar incidents like the case of David Stephen Middleton and the murder of Sarah Everard. r/AskReddit is a popular and active subreddit designed as a place where users can ask and answer different questions. In 2020, a user, EasyP96, asked Redditors about their creepiest Airbnb story, and one user by the handle Tubabo Liviano had a pretty intriguing tale. Sometime in 2020, Tubabo Liviano stayed at a lovely Airbnb in Iowa for his younger brother's graduation. The graduate had no idea they would make it, so they threw a surprise party at the Airbnb for him. While setting up for the party, the OP went down with another brother to the basement to get an extra table. As soon as they got down there, they looked at each other and said, "Yep, it's scary here." They searched for the table, and the longer they spent in the basement, the greater the feeling of dread grew. After finding the extra table, they headed back upstairs, joking about how creepy a seemingly ordinary basement was. The whole family got together, and the party started. While they were celebrating, the OP's girlfriend decided to run the washer, which was downstairs. She was going to go down alone, but asked the OP to accompany her since it was creepy. He agreed, and they rushed to leave the basement. The party continued, and everyone had a wonderful time. As the night settled, the guests left for their hotels. It was now just the OP and his girlfriend, unwinding after an afternoon of eating and drinking. They were relaxing when the laundry buzzer went off. The OP's girlfriend hadn't picked up the load from earlier. It was strange that it hadn't beeped hours ago. They headed down to the basement, but as they got closer, the washer's buzzer went off again. They both jumped, hurried down, grabbed the laundry, and headed upstairs to let it air dry. Sensing her nervousness, the OP decided to go through the house and lock all the windows and doors, a standard step when visiting an Airbnb. The OP's girlfriend stayed beside him the whole time, never leaving his sight for fear of her safety. They finally reached the last door, the door to the back garden right outside the kitchen, and at the top of the basement stairs. He locked the door, ignoring the sense of dread with his back turned to the basement. The house was old, so the stairs were steep, and the bedroom where they slept was probably originally an attic. To turn on the lights upstairs, they had to flip a switch at the bottom of the stairs. As they made their way in the dimly lit house to the light switch, their tiredness overcame the dread. The OP flipped on the switch and headed for the stairs. Just as he did, they heard a loud banging sound like pots or something metallic clanging. A fast tone, whack, whack, whack. Both of their faces were full of fear. The OP darted for the kitchen where there was a knife, but the whacking sound came again, this time from the top of the stairs. They looked up and saw what was causing the ruckus. It was a ceiling fan turned to its max setting, its mounting pole making the noise. Half exhausted and half scared, they got ready for bed. The OP looked out the attic window to check on his car. Everything seemed adequate, and he fell asleep. But it was a restless night, hot and stuffy. The OP claimed he had dreams of seeing a shadowy figure on the lawn, but they were leaving in the morning, so he thought little of it. Waking up, he went down to the kitchen to brew some coffee. As he turned around, he looked at the staircase to the basement. Something felt wrong, and he was somehow drawn to the basement again. He looked down the stairs and walked down. Seeing nothing, he headed back upstairs. After breakfast, they packed their bags and got ready to leave. Doing one last sweep, he checked the kitchen to ensure everything was in good shape. Just as he was about to say all good, the washer started buzzing again. The OP turned to his girlfriend, and both of them were just like, nope, and they proceeded to leave this haunted Airbnb. The OP grabbed their bags while he told his girlfriend to start the car. As they were leaving, the fan upstairs turned on again, making the whacking noise. The OP bolted out of the house, his face reflecting panic. "What happened?" she asked. "The fan turned on again," he replied. They switched seats, and he sped off to a local diner to collect their thoughts. He texted the Airbnb host, mentioning the washer kept making noises, and he couldn't figure out how to turn off the ceiling fan upstairs. The host only replied, "Thank you for staying with us."